DJ Event Planner will change the way you manage and run your business. Streamline all of your procedures and software into one easy-to-manage system. DJ Event Planner, the ultimate online planning tool.
Welcome to DJNTV and Tuesday Night with Ben Stowe. Now introducing the one and only Ben Stowe.
Yeah, baby! Yeah. Good evening and welcome to those of you out there on the internet world. Tonight we're going to be coming to you not only from Minnesota, where we typically come to you Tuesday Night with Ben Stowe, but tonight Ben has gone south.
Yeah, I went south all right.
Seriously, it was 0 last week, below 0 for a few days, and what do? You head to Arizona.
I'm no fool. Mama didn't raise no fool. Yeah, I was in Dallas last week and Arizona this week. I will admit, cold as it might be, I'm looking forward to coming home.
It was 40 some degrees today. It was absolutely beautiful. I was outside and I'm thinking to myself, it smells like spring.
Wow. Yeah, I saw it. Looked. It's actually rainy here and it's a little bit cold.
What? It's 71.
That's a good question. Let me check. Let's check the local weather report here.
So while you're pulling that up,
60.
60. Oh, that is kind of chilly actually for Dallas.
We get thunderstorms tonight even, so wow. I could be a hero in Arizona. They told me that it hasn't rained since January.
Well, that's the desert for you. We can't say that. It's like a week without rain, and we're like, whoa, what happened? Our new
right.
So tonight, gang, we're going to be talking about controllers. This is actually a semi-common question that I see where people are asking the difference in output. I've got this controller and I want to put it into the speaker and I'm not getting enough sound. And there's this question if all controllers and all mixers are the same when it comes to output, and there's different types of connections. So Ben, I wanted to just kind of jump on that a little bit tonight and kind of discuss if there are differences and what type of things people should be thinking about when they're making those purchases of buying mixers or controllers for their system. So,
boy, that's a deep topic, and I think to start with the question and the graphic as I saw it, are there differences in output? Yes. Are there differences in types of signals? Yes. Is that what you should be looking at when it comes to a controller? Probably not. I think it's important, and I think it's a consideration. But I think that the feature set of the controller probably trumps that. We probably have to look at does the controller or the mixer do everything else you need it to do, and so then I think that can be one of those things. Specifically, when we talk about strength of output or strength of signal, I'm going to talk for a minute about consumer level versus pro level, but I haven't tested all these controllers, and undoubtedly we would find some nuances and we would find some differences, but I don't have the supporting data, so I can't say authoritatively, which one has more or less, but I'm going to talk about that in a second and why I don't know that necessarily is all that critical either. And the other thing I'll say, and by the way, I've got guys here from Roland and Pioneer, whatnot, where I'm at, and we were talking about this a little bit before I got on air. And I said, I asked them if they had the data that they could give me, and they said, well, I would have to, dig through engineering and, probably not. And I said, well, it doesn't matter because next week you're going to release a new one anyway, probably. So,
there is that.
Yeah, they didn't laugh like you did, but but that kind of feels that way sometimes with controllers. They have a lot shorter lifespan than say like a loudspeaker or something. So, so I think when it comes to the differences and the nuances of maybe strength of output, thinking about this in terms of voltage, it's not necessarily all that critical because you can adjust the overall gain structure of your system. Now, that's not to say that a cleaner, better signal isn't better. Well, of course it is. But when we think about our gain structure, we're going to start at our inputs and we're going to work our way through to our outputs. And so from there, we can make some adjustments, on our amplifier or our powered loudspeaker, and probably make adjustments for some of those minor differences. That said, though, whenever you feel like it's a good time to jump in the rabbit hole, I do want to talk a little bit about pro audio versus consumer audio.
Yeah.
And DJs really, I think, are almost to blame for this. And I'm talking about back to the earliest days of DJs. And I say this with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor and a little bit of love because, one, DJs created the problem simply by creating an industry that didn't exist. And now we still get to live with the problem all these years later. And the problem that I'm talking about is that we tried to make this, I'll use a DJ word and I'll say mashup of consumer audio and pro audio. We took consumer turntables and professional amplification systems and we wanted to smash them together. And so we still see this hybrid of consumer and pro audio living in our gear today. And to me, that feels like a really good segue to talk about what is what.
That would be good. Yes, you've referred to it, and it's like, well, I haven't really heard it described the different, or that a consumer audio and a pro audio.
Well, and you know what? I'm sure there are some DJs right now that are resenting the fact that I'm calling it consumer audio because they say we're pros, we're not consumer. Well, okay, I'm not disagreeing with that, but it's not my words. That's how it is. Mm-hmm. Consumer audio circuits are also cheaper to manufacture too, by the way. At least that's what I'm told. So let me pull up a picture that I've got here. Sure. You'll see that I spent a lot of time on this graphic, very detailed.
Nice. I'm excited because the detailed graphics are always so much fun.
All right, you see it?
Yeah. Wow, that is... My whole belief system is turned upside down.
So basically, on one side of the graphic, we see XLR connectors, which have 3 conductors. These are typically used with pro audio level. And we're going to get a little bit more into the rabbit hole here. We're going to talk about what is pro versus consumer in terms of voltage. But for right now, I'm going to focus for a second on balanced and unbalanced. Mm-hmm. And so there are really 2 critically different things about these. One, of course, we see that these have 3 conductors and thus they are balanced. The signal carrying conductors, the plus and the minus, if you will, are separated from the ground. The shield and the ground protect those signals. So there's one of the key differences. And on the right, and I chose this picture, which has not just RCA, which of course we've seen, but also a 3.5 millimeter. TRS can be particularly confusing because it is 3 conductors, but in this case, what we have is essentially 2 positive conductors, a left and a right, and a shared minus. And our minus conductor, and I'm just sort of using that as a descriptive term,
sure,
is also shared with our shield. So the signal cold or the signal minus occupies the same conductor as our shield. And thus, these unbalanced signals they need to be kept very short. We shouldn't really go more than 3, 6, maybe 10 feet with these signals because they're a lot more vulnerable to noise and that sort of thing. But they're also typically carrying a consumer level signal. So I'm sort of holding off on that because that's got all the nerdy goodness baked into it. But it comes down to a matter of voltage. And we've talked about this before when we talk about gain structure. And we think about our audio signal as simply that. This is an electrical representation or manifestation of our acoustic audio signal. And in its simplest and purest terms, it is voltage. So I will stop this graphic.
Ben, as long as you were just talking about the 1/8-inch jack that was on the plug there. Someone asked about the 1/4-inch jack. Would a 1/4-inch jack be considered a pro level, or does it matter? Is it more of a connection thing?
I'm really glad they asked. When I was making the graphic, I struggled with the notion of whether or not I would put a 1/4-inch on there, and ultimately I decided not to because the answer is it depends. So a 1/4-inch connector is used for a lot of things. It's used for foot switches, sustain pedals on keyboards. It's used for speakers. It's used sometimes for microphones. It's used for all kinds of different interconnect, most of which should never be connected to each other. So 1/4-inch can be a lot tougher. when we see a 1/4-inch connector that has only one stripe on it, and thus 2 conductive parts, that's what we call a TS, a tip sleeve. And that is always going to be unbalanced as it only has 2 conductors. When we see one that has 2 stripes on it, separated into 3 conductive parts, that one could be balanced. So then we would have a tip, ring, and sleeve, which could represent our plus, minus, and shield. Or it could be like the 3.5 millimeter we just saw, or the 1/8 inch that we just saw, in where it is a dual unbalanced, stereo or dual mono. But in that case, it's an unbalanced. It's a shared signal minus and 2 positives. So I decided to leave 1/4-inch out, but I guess, hey, now it's in there. So the answer to your question is it depends. Can you carry pro audio level on 1/4-inch? Absolutely. Can you carry consumer audio on 1/4-inch? Absolutely. A bit tougher. So some of the ways that we can tell, maybe one is if our equipment says, and not all of it does, and that's very frustrating, but much of our equipment will say if it's TS or TRS. If it's TRS, we can probably safely assume it's balanced, particularly if it's an output like a zone or a booth or even a main output, and we have designated lefts and rights, and it says TRS, then we could safely assume that's balanced. But sometimes it doesn't say.
And that's hugely frustrating because you look at it or maybe even take a little pen light to look in there and see if you can see the contacts. Okay, because usually if they're a tip ring sleeve, you'll have contacts at like 90 degrees from each other, and you can't tell.
Excellent point, John. Thanks for throwing that in there. Yeah, that's kind of what we're resorted to do when it doesn't say, or if our documentation doesn't say. And then, of course, it's a matter of output voltage. And sometimes we know and sometimes we don't know. And those are typically indicated as +4 and -10. So that's probably a good setup for whenever you're ready to jump in the rabbit hole.
You keep referring to this rabbit hole. It sounds like an absolute fabulous place because I'm sure they serve ice cream.
I don't know. I think they...
No?
I don't know if they do. Speaking of which, I haven't had any ice cream here, actually. So
wow, that's sad. I think we could put the order in and maybe that we could have that changed in a future show.
Are you having ice cream delivered here? Not
there. No.
Oh.
The staff.
All right, well, a future show, perhaps.
Yes, because the staff at the other studio is much more accommodating.
Yeah, they can be. They're probably eating my ice cream right now.
Watching the show saying, Dad, you're not getting this. As the ice cream sandwich hits the floor.
Yeah, the duckbill sandwich. So a couple things that we should know about +4 and -10 is they're not the same either. +10 is measured in dBu, which is dB unloaded, and this goes back to like a crazy old holdout from the telephone days. And the other one is measured in dBV, or decibel voltage. So right off the get-go, we're not just comparing +4 to -10. So I've got some mathematical comparisons, and I've got a handy graphic that I found thanks to whoever uploaded it to Wikipedia, so thank you for that. Also, whoever it was, I forgot their name, thank you for granting the world permission to share it, because frankly, I was just too lazy to make my own. So
You've
I've got busy. This graphic. What's that?
You've been busy, and I mean, I told you about the topic about 40 minutes ago, so I mean, you've been busy since then.
Yeah, it was probably plenty. I had time to make the one graphic, so, Anyway, so let me pop up that graphic real quick, and let's go here. There we go. All right, are you seeing it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the long and the short of it here, and we see a lot of things that are talked about. I guess you can see my mouse pointer, right?
Yep.
Moving around here?
Yep, you can see a little crosshair there.
Yeah, perfect. So right here we see volts RMS, which is root mean square. More on that in a minute. And here we see volts peak. And then here we see volts peak to peak, PP, peak to peak.
Okay.
All right. And we're going to just focus on the black line and the maroon line because these represent our +4 and our -10. And again, you can see in the key of this graphic that it's indicated here as dBu, and it's indicated here as dBV.
Okay.
So let's just forget about all that confusing nonsense, and let's break it down into voltage. At the end of the day, it's voltage, okay? So what we can see is that the peak voltage of a pro audio signal is 1.736. And that gives us, and you've probably heard me say this in previous shows, a lot of times I'll just call it 1.2. And what we're talking about there is the volts RMS. So the voltage RMS of a pro audio signal is 1.228. And to say 1.2 is probably close enough.
Okay.
And by the way, we're talking about line level audio, and I know you wanted to talk about mic level, so I'll throw that in here in a second. And I wish I had it on the graphic, although it's just about on the graphic because it would just be about the flat line here. More on that in a minute. By contrast, what we see with the consumer audio is the -10, and here we can see that the consumer audio is 0.447. All right, so as a very big difference, from 1.44, and actually I don't see it on here. The RMS value of that would be about 0.316, I think. So yeah, it would be about 0.316. So what we're seeing here is the peak level of consumer level, and then the RMS would be substantially lower at like 0.3, give or take, 0.316. And just so we have a point of reference here, microphone level is about 0.02. So we measure that in a magnitude of millivolts. So substantially lower.
So Bennis, I'm looking at this. Obviously, the consumer's got a much lower voltage. Does that give us a difference in the sound capability, not volume-wise, but say the richness of the music and the we've talked in the past about wavelengths and different things as we've gone through. Does it lose some of the fidelity when you go to consumer from the pro, or does that really not matter?
I'm gonna pause the video for a second, John, because the air conditioner in my room has kicked on and I can barely hear you. I don't know if you can hear it, but it is rocking over there. So
no, we can't hear it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, bear with me 1 second. I'm just gonna stop the video and I'm gonna have you repeat the question.
Okay. Are you good? I think he's good. So what I was asking, if you didn't hear, Ben, is the difference between the consumer and the pro is if the consumer doesn't have quite the fidelity because of the less power or less voltage that it's putting out. If the peaks and the valleys and the frequencies aren't as great, if that correlates to that, and we don't have the fidelity in the consumer that we would in a pro.
All right. So I caught about a tenth of that.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're right. I don't have hard data to back this, and I like to always stick to data, but I sure feel like the pro sounds better.
Okay. That's kind of what I'm after here, is if there was.
Yeah, and there's probably a lot of things that we could point to. One is just, the higher voltage gives us a bit more resolution, we might say. And also the pro signals are typically propagated on a balanced signal. So I think it's probably a sum of a few things, but without having data to support my opinion here, I think pro sounds a lot better.
Okay.
So there's that. So let's see, what did we cover? We covered RMS and peak. Again, I'm not getting a lot of sleep here in Phoenix, so I apologize. We covered microphones being millivolts, which again is another reason gain structure is very important. We're taking that mic signal and we're going to amplify it.
Actually, Ben, you didn't get to the mic. The mic is where you're up to now. You were saying that mic level would be like almost a flat line. It's very close to a flat line.
Yeah, because if we look, instead of, let's say, for example, here our red dotted line down here, if we take that and we say, okay, well, instead of 0.447, we're looking at 0.02.
Oh,
so it's a substantially lower voltage.
Wow, I didn't realize it was so incredibly different than the pro level.
Yeah, and really, if we think about it, it's pretty easy to figure out why. Because if we think about the construction of a microphone, in the case like a dynamic, we have a coil and a permanent magnet, and it's simply the acoustic energy moving that coil on the magnet that generates a very small voltage. And that's what our microphone is generating. So that's why we have what's called preamps. And those preamps do exactly as the name implies. They pre-amplify the signal. So we're bringing in that mic signal and we're pre-amplifying it in almost every case that I can think of, up to a pro signal. So there's a substantial amount of amplification that occurs to bring that up to that 1.228 RMS level for a pro signal. And of course, when we think about a modern DJ mixer, we have both mic preamps and we have RCA connections for inputs and that sort of thing, CD players and whatnot.
Right.
So here again, that's where we see that kind of that mashup, that melding of signals. And then more often than not, our pro, we'll call them pro controllers here, have XLR outputs that are driving pro level balanced output to powered loudspeakers and that sort of things. I am really hoping to get my hands on some data. One of the manufacturers told me they have comparative data, and if I can get that, that would be good. Now, whether or not they'll let me share it, that's another thing. But I'd like to see some laboratory grade tests done on these outputs.
Give a person an idea. Okay, so my next question, Ben, is we're looking at the Pro line output here of the +4 dBu. Does that always connect with an XLR type of a connection, or can you have a pro level line out voltage coming out from a different type of connection, maybe an RCA or something to that effect?
I don't know that I've ever seen it on an RCA, but like we talked about just a little bit ago, you can absolutely have that on a 1/4 inch.
Sure. That was a tip ring sleeve balanced out. Yeah. Okay. So if an RCA wouldn't have that extra, I'm just kind of thinking, because we've got a popular mixer that we've talked about on a lot of the shows has been the little tiny Newmark DJ to Go 2. Nice little unit that you can use for performance, but it has an 1/8 inch jack as its output, which would be consumer level. Correct. So to get that to our speakers in the best way possible, you mentioned that consumer level wire shouldn't be over 6 feet long. So really to do that and do that right, a person should be running it into some sort of a mixing board to get you from point A to point B, switching it over to that balanced signal. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, you are. There's other ways to do that. You could use a small stereo direct box to balance that signal to allow it to run longer distances. Here again, there are better and worse quality of DIs. Behringer makes a small stereo DI that's about $20. And Radial makes the Pro AV2, which is, I think, about $120.
And I'm glad you went that direction, Ben. That's exactly where I was headed to with this. Because, okay, so my little Newmark unit, and again, there's lots of companies that make a small one like that. For those of you out there who are like, oh, my favorite one is this brand, whatever. It's got that consumer voltage coming out of it. I put it into a DI, so now I can run a longer distance balance, but I'm going into the speaker still with a consumer voltage. Am I reading that right?
Yes, actually, once you come out of that DI, you're now coming in with a mic level voltage. That DI is dropping that down so that it can plug into a mixing board's mic preamp.
Okay.
So it actually dropped the voltage way down, but we've at least balanced it, which makes it safe to run long distances without fear of interference. Now, you can run an unbalanced signal 50 feet, and people do it. You're a lot more vulnerable to noise, and you're going to have substantial signal degradation potentially. So that's why it's not necessarily advisable. I think when we think about why people would use a DJ to Go 2, oftentimes it's for very small events where they don't want to bring out a lot of hardware, or it's a backup. Yeah. In which case, it's better than having no music. The 3 rules of sound are: rule number 1, make sound. Rule number 2, continue to make sound. And rule number 3, when possible, make good sound. So, the DJ to Go 2 might be in that scenario, right? Yep. Where it's our backup and it's getting us through the night. And at that point, people maybe aren't going to be audio critics so much as they would be upset if there was no music.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure. It's that or nothing. So you're certainly there.
Yeah, if it's your primary, device, then you're probably spending extra money on things like mixers and DIs and things, and you probably could have bought just a better controller, maybe. But I'm not telling anybody how to do their thing. I'm just saying those are sort of how I imagine that device might be getting used. Because yes, the 1/8" jack is certainly has a lot of vulnerabilities to it. Not the least of which being that it's going to wear out eventually.
Sure. Yeah. Unfortunately, they do. A lot of questions here that are coming through. First one.
We poked the hornet's nest, didn't we?
Well, we did a little bit, and we're going to.
Good. I like that. That's good.
The first one, before we get into, because they're asking about impedance, and I'm going to rephrase that question in just a second. So we'll be back with you guys on that one.
Oh, impedance. Oh, somebody really wants to go down the rabbit hole.
Oh, goodness gracious. He had a nap and he had some sugar before we went on, I'm sure of it.
I didn't get much of a nap because I no sooner got sent to take a nap because I've just been exhausted running on vapors, and of course I'm getting old, but no sooner gone to take a nap and I got the 911 call saying, "Help, please come help solve this audio problem. It's not your problem, but please come fix it." And I said, "Okay."
Yep, so you've got this little board that you like to use when you're doing concerts, this Digico board.
Mm-hmm.
It barely big enough to handle most applications. I realize that. And then
it only has 96 inputs, but it is one of the smaller Digicos, yes.
So the output, the voltage that comes out of that, is that higher than, say, if we have a really nice DJ board, the $1,000, $1,500 DJ controller board? Are we talking a similar voltage output, or does a board at that concert level have even more output than that 1.2 volt that you were saying that is a pro level?
So here again, I don't have actual data
to
support this. I haven't measured it.
Gut feeling.
I will say this, because I used a Digico board at Arm DJ a couple of years ago, the year Robbie got married. I said, you know what? Hey, my friend's getting married. We're going all out. Mm-hmm. And people were somewhat blown away. They're saying, wow, I have these same speakers, but they sound so much better. And one, I guess I'm not a total idiot when it comes to mixing sound, but two, that board does have tremendously great processing and inputs and outputs, and every part of it is just better. So, when you're getting a Digico or something on that level, that's just every part of that is better. So whether or not the voltage is necessarily higher, I would say that the signal quality is probably better. The outputs in that board, and again, this is no disrespect to the guys making DJ controllers, but by and large, the engineers at Digico know that this signal is going to be amplified on an arena level, that this is going to go to a very big rig. Now, again, some of these, DJ controllers are used on tours and that sort of thing, and they're certainly putting out, a good signal too. So I don't know that. I guess I'm sort of dancing around the question because I don't know the answer.
Sure.
I guess what I'm trying to say is it's probably not just a question of voltage,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
More isn't necessarily better. Again, that's where gain structure comes in. So more isn't necessarily better.
And speaking of gain structure, for those of you who are going to be with us in February 24th through the 27th in Las Vegas, Ben Stowe is going to be doing a masterclass talking about things that are really important to you. Might be gain structure, could be microphones, it could be how to eat your ice cream on camera without it melting all over the keyboard. Oh wait, that didn't happen like that. It melted all over the keyboard.
It melted, yeah. Mission fail. So setting aside the ice cream thing, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because it hasn't been decided what I'm going to do, and the reason for that is I want to know what you want to know. So I think your feedback is going to be essential. I want our time together to be meaningful to you. I'm going to have a good time either way. I'll be perfectly happy to sit up there and talk about nerdy things all day. But at the end of the day, I want you to come to this class and leave with something. I want you to say this time was, judiciously spent. My time to go to this conference and the money to go to this conference was a good investment. So give that feedback to John. Or myself. Feel free to contact me and let us know what you'd like to hear in this masterclass. And I want to, do the best I can to make sure that time is honored.
Excellent. But links for everything is down in the description of the video. You guys can just pop down there, get yourself involved, and we will, reach out to us, and we'll get you answered questions and all sorts of good stuff. So let's grab some of the questions. First off, the impedance question is up there a couple of times, but I want to, before we get to that version, if I'm coming out from my...
You guys are gluttons for punishment. I like it.
I know. That's why I'm trying to get to every other question before we get to that one. So if we come out of a board, we're coming out, we've got our 1.2 pro level voltage coming out with an XLR. We go into our first speaker. If I piggyback, because many of my DJ speakers have the ability to piggyback from the one speaker to the next speaker, does that lower the voltage so it splits the voltage in half? Or is it something that the voltage is still 1.2 at the first one and it would be 1.2 at the second one?
You have no idea, but you just stepped in it because you just asked an impedance question.
I know I was really going that direction, but I wanted to put it into a situation where people could actually say, "Oh yeah, that's an interesting method of asking," instead of saying, "Ben, tell us about impedance." Because if I'd say, "Ben, tell us about impedance," you would start way up here, and then I'd have to translate down to, "Well, that's going piggybacking from one speaker to the next." So
okay, viewers, everybody take note. John knew the answer to this question, and he intelligently reframed it for you. That's what this guy does. This guy knows the answers to a lot of the questions that he's asking me, and he's doing such a good job of representing the viewer. So just kudos to John, because I really thought he just stepped in it, but truth is, he was smarter than me, and he led me right down the trail. All right. So good for you, John.
Rabbit hole. Well, rabbit hole.
Here we go, diving in. So the most important thing that we need to know about impedance is that low drives high. Okay, so the typical output impedance of a circuit is going to be between 100 and 600 ohms. And our typical input impedance is going to be, let's just call it 10 kilo ohms or more, 10,000 ohms and up. And we want to maintain a ratio. And just like in the good old days when we had passive loudspeakers, we took two loudspeakers in a parallel circuit. So we have an 8 ohm loudspeaker here and an 8 ohm loudspeaker here, and we connect them together in parallel. We end up with a load to our amplifier of 4 ohms. So when we decrease the impedance, we can increase the flow of electricity. And so at the end of the day, it isn't so much, we do lose some voltage just over length of cable and all those kinds of things, but it isn't so much a question of voltage as it is power. And when we add these in a parallel circuit like that, we lower the impedance, which allows that to be somewhat consistent throughout the circuit. And we're assuming a passive circuit here. We can do this for a number of times. We can daisy chain through a number of loudspeakers or a number of amplifiers simply by looping through, as long as we maintain that ratio, low driving high. So, I like to maintain at least like a 10-to-1 ratio, but anyway, that gives you kind of a sense of, where does impedance fit in this whole picture? Low drives high, low being typically 100 to 600, and high being 10 kilo ohms and up.
So
now,
hang on. We need to. You were talking ohms, and for a lot of people who were back in the day when we had those 8 ohm speakers or the 4 ohm subwoofers, that's a talk of the resistance that the speakers, the load they'd put, but that was a resistance measurement that you're referring to.
Well, technically an impedance measurement, which is sort of resistance with frequency. But hey, since we're in the rabbit hole, I mean, I know Howie would call me out on that if I didn't say that. So, in layman's terms, we can think about it as resistance. The resistance to the flow of the electricity. But in this case, it is impedance, and we could argue, that they are functionally the same in the simplest of terms, but in technical terms, they're different.
Okay.
We have some very smart viewers, and I couldn't let that go.
That's why I want to make sure we're using some terminology that we were comfortable with 25 years ago. That's what they said back then. I wasn't there. That was way too long ago. But
you weren't even born yet.
I heard people talk about those words, and I thought, hey, that's a big word. Let's use it.
if you're really curious, it's named after Georg Simon Ohm as well. Anyway, but all these dead famous guys that we named things after. So the other thing I wanted to mention, though, is I was talking about a passive circuit where it's a passive, loop through or whatever. If the device, the amplifier or the loudspeaker is an active circuit, then it essentially resets. It's a new circuit when it comes out. And that can be a difficult answer to get sometimes. You'd be surprised how difficult it can be to have a manufacturer tell you if their circuit is active or passive. So you can always safely assume it's passive, and you can be pleasantly surprised if it's active, I suppose.
So if it would say on your device, the output, if it would say a sum out, would that most likely signify that's active?
Yeah, I would think so. Because hopefully we're using some type of active summing circuitry inside, to do that. So that would be probably a safe bet. Certainly something like the Evolve, for example, and this is just fresh in my mind because I just did this today, where you have the choice of choosing whether that is a, right only or a left-right sum. That is almost certainly an active output.
Okay.
So, yeah, good to see you again, viewers. John's so smart. What do you need me for? You don't need me. I'm just here to eat the ice cream. So,
somebody's talking about Oreo cookie shake. That would be like really good. Yeah, that sounds really good.
I'm not a huge Oreo fan, and I think, I was traveling the other day, and I knew that that's when I maybe was just a little off. I went to Shake Shack and got an Oreo shake, and I thought, I don't normally get that. I must just need to get home. The universe is not right.
Yeah, there's a little imbalance in the force, and
yeah.
Okay,
yeah, it's just something. The law.
Since we're talking force, we're going to take like a 30-second break and tell us did you get to see on Disney Plus Mandalorian?
Yes, I did. I'm very happy to report that my friend and I had a gleefully nerdy time. I think it was good for him too. It was cathartic, for both of us. Of course, his son is also a Star Wars fan. At least his oldest son. His youngest son is getting there. But anyway, I shouldn't talk too much about his kids on national TV here. Anyway, we did, and we watched Mandalorian about 18 times, I think.
I wasn't expecting that. So obviously, you found it acceptable.
Well, yeah, more than one anyway. Maybe it wasn't 18, but we watched it until we literally fell asleep watching it. Just each of us would kind of wake up in turn. We're on couches that are next to each other, and be kind of like, hey, wake up! Oh, and then the other one would fall asleep. Whatever, So anyway, we until we finally just couldn't keep ourselves awake anymore to watch it, like for the bazillionth time. And by the way, since he has sent me text messages with some more deeper reading on Mandalore and the Beskar Steel and that sort of thing. There's this whole supporting story. It was very, very interesting. And spoiler alert here. Spoiler alert, if for some reason you haven't seen Mandalorian yet and you want to, this is a good time to stop watching or fast forward, or whatever. I won't give away too much, but it was really interesting. There's a lot of callbacks. Of course, we see a lot of characters we're familiar with, the Jawas and that sort of thing. But I think they've done a really good job, too, of kind of setting this up to be its own thing. There's enough comfort and familiarity with the Star Wars universe. We see, references to the Empire and its fallen nature. Very much has a Wild West feel to it. I very much, feel like these guys said, hey, let's make a Western and then let's put everybody in like space armor.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few people who made that comment on it.
Yeah, I definitely would say that. And of course now, look, I mean, again, I said spoiler alert, but it's all over the internet. The baby Yoda, which to my knowledge, Yoda's species was never really defined. And there's only 2 Yoda types that we ever saw, and they were in the Jedi Council in the prequels.
Yes.
So this begs a lot of questions, and it's really interesting and exciting to me because I think about this as occurring before Force Awakens, sort of in that time, 5 years after Return of the Jedi. But it does raise some serious questions that maybe will be answered in Rise of Skywalker. I don't know. But anyway, some really cool things when you think about like the armorer and her helmet had horns, which maybe that was a nod to Darth Maul, you know, and of course he did rule Mandalore for a brief period of time, although I'm not sure I think the Mandalorians would be a fan of that. I don't know, you know. Anyway, I think Disney did a really good job of making me want to watch episode 3. I didn't watch this and go, oh my gosh, it's the same old tired, you know, stuff. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, Ewoks Christmas where you went, what are they doing? You know, like you just go, this is too, no, bad, George Lucas, bad.
That was such a great show.
This makes me want to watch episode 3, and I think this has some legs. This thing could really develop. This could be cool. I could enjoy this.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. We're going to wait so we can watch it as a family.
Oh, so I just spoiled it for you.
It doesn't matter. I haven't read everything that there is to read about it. I probably know more about the thing from reading a lot of the Reddit pages that are dedicated to it. I'm not one that likes the surprise. I would rather be prepared and say, oh yeah, here it comes.
Well, and you will be. I mean, obviously now you're not going to be surprised by the Baby Yoda thing, but I think there's still plenty. And like anything, you watch it the second or third time, you pick up a lot of things. There is a lot in here. They did their homework, and honestly, I liked it better the second time because the first time I was just sort of, you know, reacting to a lot of things and sort of, you know, again, fearful that they were going to just ruin this. The second time I thought, oh no, these guys, and of course Dave Filoni's, you know, I mean, he is Mr. Star Wars. You know, they are true to, I think, what the Star Wars fan base wants, and
Excellent.
So far, I think you're going to really enjoy it. There's a lot of things you'll hear references to like mythosaurs and stuff that, again, if I didn't have my friend there who's more of a nerd than me. So
we got to pause. Let me explain this part to you. Now, this is why they said that, and this is what happened to them. Yeah.
Well, we did spend some time talking about it. Even the next morning, as he drove me to the airport at some ridiculous hour, we were talking about it. So, anyway,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, we need to wrap things up tonight. You need to get back to the crowd there at the Collective this evening.
There's a pool party, man. I'm going to go get my pool party on.
In 60-degree weather. Well, yeah, that's true. You are from Minnesota. That's summer. What am
Exactly.
I talking?
Everybody, they wanted to move the pool party in because it's so cold. I think I might go find one of them inflatable unicorn floaty things and go take a couple laps around the pool.
That'll be a visual.
The visual was last night us riding scooters through Phoenix traffic. That was the visual.
Oh boy.
I'll just leave you at that.
Yeah, don't you kids know better? Well, thank you guys for being with us tonight. We had a great crowd. We topped out well over 100 people on the different channels tonight. So thank you very much for hanging out with us on the different channels. And next week, I think next week's Thanksgiving week. So I'm not sure if we're going to do a Thanksgiving show or not. Ben, we'll have to discuss that a little bit and see if we're going to do one before Thanksgiving. Otherwise, we will see you for surely that first week in December. So everyone have yourself a good evening. Brian and I will be back in about 15 minutes tonight at the top of the hour. Good night, everybody.